government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
Said about the Central Intelligence Agency is what I've been saying on this show from the beginning, and it came from their mouths now. Witkoff is briefed 3 times a day by the CIA, and they lie to him. This is not some marginal mistake in intelligence. He sat right there. They lied to him 3 times a day. Hamas doesn't want to do the deal, never going to do the deal. That's the Mossad talking. That's Netanyahu talking. Ratcliffe should resign today, or let's just have a congressional hearing, right, on national television, and let's just put it out there exactly about what you told these people in this negotiation, and let's go back to what you told the President of the United States about the beginning of the 12-day war, because that was a lie also, as now we know by the Times of Israel putting out the cabinet minutes of the war cabinet of Netanyahu. They were 2 years away, not 2 days, not 2 weeks, 2 years, of which he copped a half of that on Brett Baer on that Sunday night. We said, yeah, it's 6 months, 9 months, it's a year. Wasn't 2 days, wasn't 2 weeks, it was 2 years. Basically, there ain't no emergency. There was an emergency to kill the negotiators, of which they did, so that Witkoff couldn't have a meeting in Muscat, Oman on that Sunday. Why? Because the Mossad controls the CIA. Thank God for Tulsi Gabbard. They tried to run Tulsi Gabbard out of this city. You talk about courage. You talk about a profile in courage, it's Tulsi Gabbard and her team over there at DNI. She testified to Congress. She went on and talked in the media. She was vilified, and this is Israel First crowd trying to run a patriot out of town because she's telling the truth to the commander-in-chief. And Huckabee, the clown ambassador, who's an embarrassment, a total embarrassment. What he's saying with this insanity. He ought to be recalled immediately and removed immediately. And my buddy Joe Pollak, I know people go crazy. I think Joe Pollak ought to be the ambassador, because Joe Pollak's a decent and good man. And when he knows all the facts, he's not going to be like Huckabee. That'll be a little controversial. I got that. I'll put David Friedman back in there. At least they're going to deal with you straight. And not misinterpret. Not misinterpret. This misinterpretation is bald-faced lies. These are bald-faced lies.
You just alluded to the violence in the Middle East. What steps is the administration taking to maintain the ceasefire?
Well, a lot of steps, and right now it's in the hands of others. You know, we have 59 countries that agreed to the deal. We have a peace in the Middle East for the first time ever. We made a deal with Hamas that, you know, they're going to be very good, they're going to behave, they're going to be nice, and if they're not, we're going to go and we're going to eradicate them if we have to. They'll be eradicated, and they know that. So they went in, and I don't believe it was the leadership, but they had some rebellion in there among themselves, and they killed some people, you know, pretty lot of people. It's a violent group. You know, you probably noticed over the last 100 years, this is a very violent group of people. And they got very rambunctious, and they did things that they shouldn't be doing. And if they keep doing it, then we're going to go in and straighten it out, and it'll happen very quickly and pretty violently, unfortunately.
On the President Putin on Thursday, did you discuss his ongoing attacks on civilian areas in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Did you say cut it out? Did you say show an article of good faith to me?
I did. But as you know, most of the people dying are soldiers. The soldiers that are dying in Russia and Ukraine, it's unbelievable. 5,000 to 7,000 a week. Can you believe it? And I look at that and I say it's pretty amazing. But in addition to that, there are attacks on Kiev and some of the other places. And it's human lives. But the big number of human lives, the soldiers that are being killed in the battlefield.
Welcome back to the SCIF. We're at the end game in many ways, folks. That's the theme of today's show. The end game in Ukraine, possibly the end game with the EU, the end game in the Middle East, and it's going to have massive consequences on the whole world. We are in the fourth turning. We are moving to a new age, one way or the other. So we're going to be there guiding you through it. We're going to make you the smartest in the room about all of this. So stay with us today on the SCIF, and we'll be here tomorrow. At the end of the week, I'm flying to Beirut. So probably we'll run reruns Thursday, maybe Friday, just so you know. But we will be reporting live from Beirut through the next week. Want to say hello to the chat in the crew in the chat. You're cleared hot. Thanks so much. Wow. It gets going like 30 minutes before the show now. So I love it. It's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Please check out whatfinger.com. They post a lot of our content. And please sign up for our socials. We had about 100 people come in yesterday on YouTube after a call for support. You know, YouTube wiped out tens of thousands of our subscribers a few years back, I guess 2021, late 2020 timeframe. And we're rebuilding. So even if you don't watch us on YouTube, go find CDM on YouTube and sign up and subscribe. Also on Rumble, CDM1. Many of you are on X. Just do the loop. Make sure you're on all of them. Subscribe to our CDM1 Rumble channel and subscribe to our X channel, CDM_press. We have an old legacy channel they gave back, which we still have. We still post on, but that says CDM Legacy. CDM_press is the one where we're verified. So please follow us there. And you can follow me if you want at Real L Todd Wood on X. So much going on. And by the way, thanks so much for Truth Social. We have 3 million on CDM and working on 4 million on armedforces.press. So fantastic. Awesome. And it's really where we get a lot of our engagement. Unfortunately, we're throttled on YouTube. We're throttled on X. So funny enough, Truth Social is where we get a lot of our engagement. So thank you for that. Talk about knowing stuff early. You heard President Trump there, obviously getting intelligence that there's 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a week on the battlefield in Ukraine. Where have you heard that before? I think it was from us with Pete Blaber and I, and we're going to have Pete Blaber here in the second hour for Ukraine SitRep, dig into all the truth. But in Ukraine, we're getting to the end game. Trump is brilliantly pulling back, and I'm going to play something from John Mearsheimer here in probably the third segment this hour on really brilliant strategy and I guess extrication by President Trump out of Ukraine step by step. That's what you're seeing, and in his view, and I completely agree. Thank God Trump came out and said, you know what, you got to make peace, Zelensky. That was yesterday. We talked about that, but we're nearing the end game in Ukraine, so we're going to talk about today what that is going to look like, but also in Gaza. So this is. Trump's talking about bringing Arab troops in to take out Hamas. I don't know what's going to happen there, but we're nearing the end game and we're watching it. Israel's started bombing again. Trump sent J.D. Vance over there to keep the peace deal going. I honestly don't know how this is going to go, but I know that extremists on both sides on the ground want the war to continue, and it's something we are going to stay on top of. You saw Steve Bannon's comments there. You know, we're not anti-Israel, but we're definitely America first, and we want America's youth, treasure, blood, future to be first. And that's what we're fighting for here at CDM. Also, the EU, we're nearing the end game. The EU could collapse. When Ukraine goes, that's their last vestige of a way to hold on to power. The people in the EU understand what's happening, also in Britain, which is essentially part of the EU now. Again, they didn't execute Brexit as required, and they're controlled obviously by globalist Starmer, globalist Merge in Germany, globalist Macron. All of them are teetering. EU could fall apart. The EU is in our view, a totalitarian scheme to. It's really the Fourth Reich. Whether there's Nazis or globalist or Marxist running this show, it's totalitarianism, and it's on full display. You can no longer not see it. And we are hopeful Trump and Vance will be more vocal in going against the EU. So we shouldn't be dealing with them. These are people putting people in jail for Facebook posts. Yesterday, a British man said something on Facebook and they arrested him, or was it in Germany? One of the two. They're both really, really bad. So we got a lot coming. Today is October 21st. I'm your host, Todd Wood. Here's your mission brief. Trump's Gaza plan is on thin ice. What will happen? We'll dig into that. Nightstalkers in Venezuela. The guys I used to fly with, used to work with them constantly. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, 160th SOAR, the Nightstalkers of the U.S. Army, are in Venezuela. I'm sure the AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command aircraft, are right behind or working in other areas. This is, we'll talk about the implications of that. And here's a big one. Georgia senator is implicated in the largest ever smurfing bust. We are out in front on this. Our own Chris Gleason and Peter Bernegger found this. And surprise, surprise, nobody else is talking about it. See if you see this anywhere else, guys. Here's your test. If you want to know who's in conservative ink, it's all the people not talking about this, about the smurfing. That's very easy tell. China is hoarding gold. I told you, folks, you got to start looking at gold and precious metals in your portfolio. We'll talk about that again. And microplastics in your body, as well as some other things. A lot to talk about today. We'll be right back on the SCIF. Stay with us.
I'm a naturopathic doctor. We are in the world of medicine very acquainted with many modalities, but probably the one most familiar with everybody would be two things: homeopathy and herbals or herbs, maybe some nutrients too, vitamins, minerals, that kind of thing. Now, we do know a lot about the drugs because we have to find out what drug you're taking affects you and what nutrient it depletes you of, because most every drug pharmacy product will deplete something. So we have been trained and we have a database that we can check into that says this is going to take your B12 away. The pharmaceutical company cannot patent organic substances made by the body. You're not born short of Advil. You're not born short of Ritalin.
Yeah.
You can be born short of insulin, right? Mm-hmm. The answers to staying healthy and keeping away from even SARS or any of those things getting into you is staying healthy.
Mm-hmm.
You and I get sick because our terrain gets out of balance. Well, that's the same thing in the soil. You and I are made from this thing called dirt. And when we get out of balance, we have the same thing happen. Weeds start to grow in our body. Right? And that's what we want in our body. We want nutrients that we don't understand how to get well enough yet because our suppliers are lacking knowledge on nutrient density foods.
So this is what drove you to develop this, was your knowledge of this, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. You know that.
I'm excited to announce that we're having a huge sale on overstock and brand new products. For example, My Pillow Percale bed sheets, every color, every style, every size, only $29.88. Our Percale bed sheets are breathable, cool and crisp, and they're perfect for spring and summer. And check out Rev 7, the next generation of energy drinks. It tastes great and it gives you energy all day with no jitters and no crashes. Best of all, it's actually good for you. And for a limited time, try our 3-pack absolutely free. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save 20% on our Rev 7 12-packs or try our introductory 3-pack absolutely free. And our Percale bed sheets, all sizes, only $29.88. Twin size, full size, queen size, king sizes, all $29.88. Inventory is extremely limited at this price, so order now.
Welcome back to the SCIF. I want to shout out a few sponsors. One is Nucleo Boost. You're looking for that stocking stuffer, that somebody who, doesn't eat well. You can't really make him or her eat well, and you're worried about their nutrition. What a great way to put this in the stocking. Get the subscription. It's cheaper every month. You can go to cdmnutrition.com, cdmnutrition.com. This gives you everything you need at the cellular level. It's got the bioallo to get it into the cell. It fills the potholes in your body. Maybe somebody who's prone to sickness or whatever. This gives them everything that they need, and it's what keeps us going. It's our stamina, and I'll tell you, we need it. And this really, really, I can highly recommend. We had it developed with Dr. Waterman and John B. Wells and his team, and it's literally everything you need in one capsule now. There's also the powder, which you can get. But anyway, this is a great stocking stuffer. Slips right in there. So on that note, let's talk about a few stories that we got out today, and then we're going to play something from Dr. Mearsheimer and then Pete Blaber, second hour. Something hit a windshield flying. This is really concerning with a large jet airliner. Look at these pictures. This is inside the cockpit of a jet aircraft. The windshield has 3 layers. Something struck the windshield at 36,000 feet. This is really, really, really concerning. They're saying it could be space damage, space junk, space debris. I don't know. Anyway, this is going on. It was forced to make an emergency landing. The windshield cracked. Obviously, the safety measures, the 3 layers did not fully crack, but this is a big deal, guys. I don't know where this is going to go. Maybe it was just space junk, or maybe it's not. There's a lot of attacks on aviation. So be aware. Here's another one in Venezuela. My old colleagues, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the 160th, the Nightstalkers, flying their little birds in an air-refuelable Black Hawk over or near Venezuela, 145 miles off the coast. This means, you can find this on Armed Forces Press. This could mean several things. One, they're training to get familiar with the theater, which is natural, any contingency. We used to do shipboard operations, ship takedowns, so they could be practicing that. They could be just learning the terrain. They could be infiltration and exfiltration of team members on the ground, different teams that we work with. And there's likely AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command aircraft and teams also in theater if these guys are there, because they all work together. And then, the ground units, whether it be white soft. I mean, these guys could be looking at high-value targets in country in Venezuela. They could be practicing, which we used to do all the time, going in and taking a high-value target, just learning the area, learning the flight paths. Or they could be practicing more of supporting a kind of big army effort in country to really take land in Venezuela and supporting them in that mission. There's all kind of things, special ops missions pilots do. It's all not just carrying SEAL Team 6 and Delta in, or white Special Forces SEALs, or white Green Berets. Is white and black soft. But this could be a lot of things. But the fact that they're there is important. It means that there's someone is serious about what's going on in that region of the world. Here in Gaza, Netanyahu pushes back against the Trump plan, worried about Turkish Qatari involvement, who are allegedly going to be there for humanitarian issues. Well, this is Israel basically sticking their giving Trump the finger on his peace plan, which is supposed to make him, the peacemaker globally, solving the worst crisis ever. And Israel doesn't look like it wants to do that. Neither does Hamas, to be fair. So I don't know where this is going to go. We'll just have to watch this. But one thing is you'll get it early and you'll get it quick on cdm.press, because we've got people on the ground all over that region, and we're getting stuff all night long. So, usually by 7:30, we're getting stuff up, sometimes earlier from the night cycle. But this is important to stay on and watch, and we'll see where this goes. This one, Iraq to keep some U.S. military advisors in country to work the Islamic threat, the ISIS threat. This is the ongoing forever war. We got to keep people there to fight ISIS. I'm not so sure of that, but because that makes them sitting ducks, small contingents for assassinations, for terror attacks or whatever. But that's what's going on. So you can read that on armedforces.press. Now, here's the big kahuna of the day. Senators Warnock and Ossoff implicated in the largest straw donor campaign finance fraud ever documented. This is smurfing. This was found by us, Chris Gleason and Peter Bernegger, and basically huge numbers of one person donating huge numbers of times, like well over 100,000 times. And Warnock and Ossoff were the recipients of a lot of this money. We're going to have the specific data out soon, but this is big. And guess what? There's going to be other senators implicated in this as well. So you'll be able to see who is criminally laundering money into their campaign. We've already outed Tom Cotton, Mike Johnson, a lot of other, Brian Kemp. A lot of people are taking this bad money, Lindsey Graham, et cetera, go down the list. So this is a huge story. It's just starting, and it will be continuing. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back with Professor Mearsheimer, and we'll dig into what's going on in Ukraine. Stay with us.
Watching my friends gain more and more weight, and then eventually I got to tell you, this is a little dark, but bad diet literally killed my whole crew.
Wow.
Diabetes, a stroke, all kinds of stuff. It's like, you had a stroke? You're not even 50 years old. You guys got to quit eating this stuff. Your body knows what's what. You're not conscious of this. But that's why people will go to the refrigerator and they'll grab this and that and the other and put together this outrageously elaborate combination of foods. Your body's trying to reach balance. Unbeknownst to us, our bodies are always trying to reach homeostasis. You can't eat all of this stuff and expect to live a long time. And one thing led to another, and I went, forget this. We're going to make our own product. So we partnered with one of the world's top 3 biochemists where nutrition specific study is concerned. I said, all I want is the best nutritional and immune support product in the world. So we mixed it in yogurt. It's a powder. I got a bag of it here. I keep one on the console all the time, just so I can show people.
Yeah.
And it's a powder. Now, this is not candy. This is hardcore nutrition. And sugar is an enemy. And most people do not know that the reason these bellies are showing up on people all over the place, your body makes fat to store the toxins it can't get rid of. So it just puts them over here. But I can tell you this, you take this for 30 days and then lay off of it for 2 or 3 days, and you'll go, good grief, give me some more. Skin, nails, hair growing back. Cut yourself and it heals in half the time.
I'm David Cross, and you may know me from my election integrity work, but I also own U.S. Asset Management, an investment advisory practice. I've been an advisor for nearly 30 years, and one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, do I have enough money relative to other people my age? And while that's an interesting question, it's also the wrong question. The right question is do you have enough money to sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life? This is a question you should know the answer to. This is what we do. Check us out at us-am.com and look for our big proud American Eagle logo.
We have foot, slogging over Africa. Foot, slogging over Africa. Boot, boots, moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. 7, 6, 11.
Welcome back. I just wanted to throw this story up real quick. I forgot to mention that in the last segment. Microplastics are unseen danger lurking in your body. This is, one of our big focuses is health and being aware of what's going on around you and being able to be the most healthy person you can. The microplastics is a big issue. You can find this article on cdm.press. And now we're going to do something which I normally don't do, but I want to play something from Professor John Mearsheimer. He's extremely intelligent and aware of what's going on in Ukraine. And I listened to this yesterday, and I thought his analysis was fantastic. So here we go. I hope you, well, hold on. Let me switch that. I hope you enjoy this. Here we go. I'm not sure why there's no sound here. Let me pull this out and retry that. I'm not sure what's going on. We'll start that over. Sorry, guys. Hold on. We're producing on the fly here. Here we go. 1 second, please.
The single most important impression that I take away from the summit is that you have the Europeans and the Ukrainians very close together on the key issues on the table. As I like to say, the Europeans and the Ukrainians are joined at the hip. And in a very important way, President Trump has distanced himself from the Ukrainians and the Europeans. The meeting yesterday was really all about Trump trying to deal with adversaries, dealing with a group of leaders who disliked what he was doing. And of course, we all know Trump has a certain contempt for the Europeans and for President Zelensky. So you had this very interesting dynamic, which I don't think most people have recognized, where it was Trump versus the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to distance himself from this conflict. Trump now realizes that he can't manage an end to the war. It's out of his hands. So what he's very subtly doing, and you saw all sorts of evidence of it yesterday, is pushing the responsibility for the war and for dealing with Putin into the hands of the Europeans and the Ukrainians, who again are working very closely together. So I think there's a fundamental change taking place in terms of how the Trump administration approaches the Ukraine war.
Why do you think that President Trump is not able to come up with a peace solution? Why is it out of his hands? The Americans are very powerful. This president is full of energy. Why his powerlessness in this case, in your eyes?
Well, first of all, we want to distinguish between a ceasefire and a genuine peace agreement. And your question had to do with a genuine peace agreement. But let's just deal with a ceasefire as well while we are at it. A lot of European leaders and President Zelensky want a ceasefire. They want an immediate ceasefire, and they want it badly. The Russians simply refuse to move to a ceasefire. Trump understands he cannot coerce the Russians into accepting a ceasefire, and therefore Trump has accepted reality and said there's going to be no ceasefire. The Europeans and Zelensky refuse to accept that argument, and they keep demanding a ceasefire. But this is a waste of time because the Russians are not going to agree to a ceasefire, and Trump recognizes that. So a ceasefire is effectively off the table. And this brings us to the heart of your question, which deals with why Trump, who's the president of the United States and therefore is an incredibly powerful man, is unable to get a deal here, is unable, to be honest, to even get close to getting a deal. The answer is very simple. The Ukrainians and the Europeans on one side and the Russians on the other side have demands that are irreconcilable. Their demands are polar opposites. Just to give you an example, the big three Russian demands on the table are that, first of all, the Europeans and the Americans and Ukraine recognize that Russia has annexed the 4 oblasts in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. So in other words, we have to recognize that. The Ukrainians and the Europeans absolutely refuse to do that. The second big Russian demand is that Ukraine has to be a genuinely neutral state. That means that Ukraine cannot be in NATO, and there cannot be meaningful security guarantees from the West, especially the United States. The Europeans and President Zelensky categorically reject that Russian demand. The third Russian demand is that Ukraine be disarmed to the point where it does not have offensive military capability that can be used against Russia. The Europeans and President Zelensky categorically reject that demand. And in fact, what the Europeans have made clear is that they want to increase the fighting power of the Ukrainian military, not decrease it. Well, given these three Russian demands, which are clearly non-negotiable, and given the fact that the Europeans and the Ukrainians reject all three of them, how can you possibly get a deal? And the answer is you can't get a deal. And Donald Trump may be powerful, but there are limits to his power. He cannot coerce either the Russians or the Europeans and the Ukrainians into accepting a deal that he, Donald Trump, likes. So Trump has come to the conclusion quite clearly that there are limits to his power. And given that he can't force an agreement on the two sides, let's let them deal with the problem. In other words, let's let the Europeans and the Ukrainians deal with Putin. And of course, all of this means that this will be settled on the battlefield.
So you would argue that there is no silver lining at the moment, that there is a negotiable peace. We will see, unfortunately, the end of this conflict on the battlefield.
I'm sad to say that that's the case. I have yet to hear anybody put forward a peace formula that even comes close to satisfying both sides. I mean, the two sides, the Ukrainians and the Europeans on one side, and the Russians on the other side, are so far apart. There is no way you can work out a deal. You know, what President Trump wants to do is he wants to basically force Zelensky and Putin to have a meeting where he's not present, where the two of them are present. And then they'll have another meeting and President Trump will be involved as a moderator at that meeting. That's his ideal situation. But the question I would ask is, if you have a meeting between Presidents Zelensky and Putin, what good is that meeting going to do when they can't agree on anything? I mean, what are they going to talk about? A possible peace agreement? That would be a waste of time because they are operating on different planets. They just, don't agree at all. So there's no silver lining here.
How do you explain that the Europeans and also President Zelensky don't see your argument? I mean, you have expressed it on many occasions eloquently. You have said, well, you would give the advice to the Ukrainian president, even though it's very bitter what he has to face, the best would be to take the deal right now, to side with President Trump, because if he continues to fight, this will be an even bigger disaster for the Ukraine. So how do you explain that these politicians insist so much on a strategy that you would say it's disastrous?
Yeah, I think about this question all the time. And I'm tempted to say it's because the European leaders and President Zelensky are irrational and they don't pay attention to facts and logic. But I think really what's going on here is that they've convinced themselves that the Russians are in deep trouble. They believe that Russia has severe economic problems, and those problems will only get worse with the passage of time. And furthermore, they believe that on the battlefield, the Russians are suffering enormous casualties. The Ukrainians are inflicting massive damage on the fighting forces on the Russian side. And at some point, the Russian army is going to collapse, or it's going to want to stop the fighting. And if the United States continues to support Ukraine and the Europeans continue to support Ukraine, Ukraine will have a great deal of leverage in future negotiations with Russia. Again, because the Russian economy will be hurting and because the Russians will be suffering on the battlefield and because the Americans and the Europeans will be backing Ukraine to the hilt. I think this is the story that they tell themselves. But it's a remarkably foolish story. The sanctions have not worked as intended, and all this talk about secondary sanctions is a waste of time because the Americans have figured out that secondary sanctions aren't going to work either. Furthermore, if you look at what's happening on the battlefield, the Ukrainians are in deep trouble because they don't have enough manpower. It's not weaponry. It's manpower now that is their Achilles heel. And there's nothing the West can do to solve the manpower problem. And furthermore, they're in trouble in terms of weaponry, and there's not much we can do there either. So they're going to lose on the battlefield. And the idea that the Russians are the ones who are suffering enormous casualties and it's not the Ukrainians has it backwards. It's the Ukrainians, not the Russians, who are suffering greater casualties on the battlefield. And the Russians are, in my opinion, not far away from winning this war. And if you read the newspapers, even in the West, carefully, and you listen to the accounts of what's going on in the fighting, it's quite clear the Ukrainians are in deep trouble. And then finally, with regard to the Americans, as I said in response to your first question, the Americans are very subtly withdrawing from this conflict and turning responsibility over to the Europeans and the Ukrainians. So the idea that you're going to get a greater contribution from the Americans is, I think, wrong-headed. So all of these things tell me that the story that I think the European elites and President Zelensky are telling to themselves is basically a fairy tale.
Do you think that politicians such as Friedrich Merz, Ursula von der Leyen, Keir Starmer, all these people who were present yesterday in Washington, are they convinced that they still can win this war against Russia militarily on the battlefield? Or do we see some kind of cynical aspect in this whole arrangement here? How do you analyze this?
I think that they do believe that they can slowly stem the tide, not win right away. They can stem the tide, and then they can inflict massive casualties on the Russians, and they can then begin to turn the tide and push the Russians back. Now, you may say, how can they possibly believe this given what's actually happening on the battlefield? I think it's important to understand that the Europeans and President Zelensky himself and many other Ukrainians are motivated to tell themselves a happy story because they have been waging this war for over 3 years now. And they have been waging it on the premise that they were ultimately going to win. For them to admit defeat at this point in time would be extremely difficult to do, extremely difficult. And I think when leaders are in a situation like that, they look for stories that they can tell themselves that lead to a happy ending. I think if we can just delay the inevitable, which is losing, some miracle will happen. You saw this with regard to the Americans in Afghanistan. It was clear after, I would argue, about 5-6 years that we were not going to win in Afghanistan. It was certainly clear after 10 years. It took us 20 years to get out of Afghanistan, 20 years, and we lost. And all sorts of people wanted to stay in Afghanistan. And if you ask them, why should we stay in Afghanistan? How are we ultimately going to prevail in Afghanistan? They had no real story, certainly no compelling story, but they just wanted to stay because they didn't want to admit defeat. And they thought maybe there would be a miracle at some point in the future. And by the way, this was true during the Vietnam War as well. I think we'd still be in Vietnam today if Congress hadn't finally cracked down and told the Nixon administration and then the Ford administration that you have to end this war. But the Ford administration, especially Henry Kissinger, who was his Secretary of State at the time, they did not want to leave Vietnam. They wanted to stay. They wanted to fight. We did not want to lose in Vietnam. And again, I think European leaders today and President Zelensky and his lieutenants do not want to lose. And they're, desperate to find a story as to how they can prevail.
We find ourselves in an absurd situation. On the one hand, we have seen in Alaska some kind of thaw between Trump and Putin, good atmosphere, well-mannered conversations. You could even speak of some kind of friendly exchanges. On the other hand, you have Europe, the European Union, one of the closest allies of the United States, building up piles of weapons and in preparation for a war against Russia. As you know, our experts here in Germany, also in Switzerland, say that Russia is planning an attack on NATO. We have to defend ourselves. And on the other hand, we have friendly relationship between the United States and Russia. I mean, how do you explain this absurdity of the whole situation?
Well, you want to remember, in his first term in office, between 2017 and 2021, President Trump wanted to have good relations with Putin and with Russia more generally. The deep state, or the blob, or the foreign policy establishment, call it whatever you want, in the United States, was adamantly opposed to that. So what Trump did in his first administration is he fundamentally altered U.S. relations with China. You want to remember, it was President Trump who abandoned engagement with China and adopted a containment policy. The other policy, again, that he wanted to pursue was to have a rapprochement with Russia and actually to form an alliance with Russia against China. He completely failed. This time, he plans to go back to that issue and actually improve relations with Russia, and in particular with Putin. The fact is that Trump likes Putin. Putin is his kind of guy. Putin is powerful. He's a first-class strategist, and Trump is someone who respects power. He respects powerful people. If you show weakness around Trump, he'll browbeat you. He does not ever fail to take advantage of weakness. But when he's dealing with Trump, when he's dealing with Putin, he's dealing with a powerful actor in the system. And he understands that. And he respects Putin. He wants to have good relations with Putin. So that's really what's going on here. With regard to the Europeans, the Russophobia in places like Britain has historically been very great. Nothing's changed on that count. And the Russophobia in Europe since 2014 has been acute, and very little has changed with regard to that. To make matters worse, and this gets to the second issue that you raised, European leaders have to mobilize their publics to support European policy toward Russia and toward Ukraine. And the way you do that is you threat inflate. You paint this picture of a Russian boogeyman, of a Russian threat that has to be dealt with. You tell a story where Ukraine is the first line of defense. And if the Russians take all of Ukraine, as you say they are destined to do, they're then going to take territory in Eastern Europe, and they're eventually going to put their gun sights on Western Europe. This is basically like dealing with the Third Reich. This is like dealing with Adolf Hitler. The Russian army is like the Wehrmacht. And if we don't stop them now, we'll make the fatal mistake that Chamberlain made at Munich in September of 1938. This is the story that the elites tell. Of course, it's fundamentally at odds with the story that Trump is telling, and it's fundamentally at odds with Trump's behavior in Alaska on Friday. There's no question about that. But the Europeans are committed to this narrative. And they're committed to this narrative because threat inflation is so important for them maintaining public support for increased spending on defense and for continuing to get European publics to support the policy towards Ukraine. And this just adds to the Russophobia and leads to the present situation that we're in. If you want, we could talk about the fact that the idea that Russia is bent on conquering all of Ukraine is nonsense.
Mhm.
The idea that it's going to conquer Eastern Europe and threaten the rest of Europe is also nonsense.
But it's very interesting what you're saying. But this argument that we are in a situation like, Chamberlain before the Second World War, this is a notion that powerful people in Germany, also in the publishing field, they cling to. And they say that's exactly the case, that everybody who has a different opinion is an appeaser. So how would you, as a strategist, as a connoisseur of history, what would be your most effective argument against these appeasement interpreters of today? Where are they wrong?
First of all, let's just talk about the capabilities. Russia has spent the past 3.5 years trying to expand its foothold in eastern Ukraine, and it has barely conquered any more territory than it had in 2022 in eastern Ukraine. The idea that Russia is this juggernaut and it has this military that's the equivalent of the Wehrmacht and can easily overrun all of Ukraine is belied by the facts. Just look at the performance of the Russian military over the past 3+ years. Does this look like the second coming of the Wehrmacht? Certainly doesn't look like that to me. Second point I'd make to you is that Putin has never once said that he was interested in conquering all of Ukraine. He has never once said that he had any territorial goals in Eastern Europe, much less Western Europe. The third point I'd make on this is that President Putin would be remarkably foolish to try to conquer all of Ukraine, because the western one half of Ukraine is filled with ethnic Ukrainians who hate the Russians and would go to enormous lengths to resist a Russian occupation. What's the story here that European leaders are telling? They're saying that Putin is going to conquer and occupy all of Ukraine, and then he's going to integrate it into a greater Russia. This is not going to happen. Putin fully understands that. We live in the age of nationalism. Putin fully understands the power of Ukrainian nationalism. He fully understands that the Ukrainians have fought like wild dogs for 3+ years because they will do anything they can to resist Russian conquest of their territory. This is not going to change when Putin conquers all of Ukraine. Let me make another point on this. When the Germans launched World War II on September 1st, 1939, and went into Poland, and you want to remember, the Germans only conquered the western one half of Poland. They were not going in to conquer all of Poland, because the Soviet Union, as a result of the von Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, was going to conquer the eastern one half of Poland. So here you have a situation where the Germans go in for the purpose of conquering, occupying, and taking large parts of Poland and incorporating it into the Third Reich. How many troops do the Germans go in to Poland with on September 1st, 1939? The answer is 1.5 million troops. 1.5 million troops. Ukraine, as we all know, is a much, much bigger piece of territory than the western one half of Poland. When the Russians invaded on February 24th, 2022, General Syrskyi, this is General Syrskyi, who now heads the Ukrainian forces, has said on the record that the Russians went in with 100,000 troops. I say they went in with 190,000 troops. I use a more conservative estimate than he does. Whether you have 100,000 troops or 190,000 troops, you are not going to conquer all of Ukraine. just not going to happen. And of course, it did not happen because the Russians were not interested in conquering all of Ukraine. And indeed, that's why they entered into the Istanbul negotiations almost immediately after invading Ukraine, because they had no interest in conquering all of Ukraine, and they did not have the capability. This army doesn't even have 1 million men in Ukraine, and it's not going to have 1 million men in Ukraine. And you'd need well over 1 million men to conquer all of Ukraine. Final point, Roger. If they conquer all of Ukraine, the Russians will be in deep trouble. They will be dealing with a resistance from the Ukrainians that is incredibly difficult to neutralize. Therefore, they will be in no position to invade Eastern Europe, much less Western Europe. So the idea that Russia is this threat to conquer all of Europe, that it's the second coming of the Soviet Union. This is like May 1945, where the Russian army or the Red Army is in Berlin with hundreds of divisions and is poised to head for Dunkirk. It's a ridiculous argument. This is threat inflation of the worst sort, and it's what gets in the way of having a realistic analysis of the situation, and in my opinion, doing what is best for Ukraine. What we're doing now is not what's smart for Ukraine. It's foolish. It's just making a bad situation worse.
Looking back at these 3 years of war from a Russian perspective, has President Putin achieved his goals? Are the initial interests and factors that he wanted to clear with this war, did he achieve that, or was this war from the Russian point of view a tragical error?
Well, the question you have to ask yourself is, why did Putin start the war? And in my story, he started the war because he was profoundly committed to making sure that Ukraine did not become a Western bulwark on Russia's border. It's very important to understand that the West, and here we're talking mainly about the United States at the time, was interested in making Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border. And the key element in the West strategy was NATO expansion into Ukraine. And from a Russian point of view, that was an existential threat. I understand that many people in the West refuse to believe that line of argument. They do not think that NATO expansion into Ukraine was an existential threat. But what they think doesn't matter. What matters is what Putin and his lieutenants thought. And they thought, and they continue to think, that Ukraine in NATO is an existential threat. And they start.
Celebrate our newest launch, Rev 7. I'm bringing you an amazing introductory offer, plus an exclusive overstock sale that you're not going to want to miss. Rev 7 is our premium energy drink that tastes great and gives you energy all day with no jitters and no crashes. That's because there's no sugar and no caffeine. I'm so sure you're going to love Rev 7 that for a limited time you can try our 3-pack absolutely free. Or check out our Percale bed sheets. I can't believe I'm even going to say this. Every color, every style, every size, only $29.88. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save 20% on our Rev 7 12-packs or try our introductory 3-pack absolutely free. And our Percale bed sheets, all sizes, only $29.88, even the queens and kings. Inventory is extremely limited, so order now.
Pandemic, we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down, and doctors' offices were shut down, and even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah, all the men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out and belong.
Welcome back to the SCIF. Hope you enjoyed Professor Mearsheimer. Tees up our next guest on Ukraine SitRep. That will be Pete Blaber, former Special Unit Commander. I'm going to bring Pete in now. He's in the green room. Pete, thanks for joining me, man.
Great to be here, Todd.
So I think Trump's been listening to our shows. What do you think?
Well, we certainly hope so. We've been begging for him to listen, and I know that J.D. Vance is kind of his special project officer for reaching out and getting diverse points of view to fact check, what they're thinking. And so on this latest, change, more to follow, but I know that J.D. Vance was the lead in really digging into the facts and finding the first cracks in the foundation that revealed that President Trump was not getting accurate information.
Well, before we move on, that's breaking news there, because we had Witkoff and Kushner actually came out and they were saying, look, we're not being told the truth in Gaza, and that the CIA is briefing us 3 times a day and we're being told the wrong information. It seems very similar in Ukraine. So this is a real freaking problem if the president can't rely on his daily intel brief, right?
Yeah, it really is. And Todd, I said more to follow. I think the more to follow part is that may be full of some controversy is the CIA part. Radcliffe seems like a good guy, but it's easy to get bamboozled by careerists, as you and I well know, and that can be careerists in Department of Defense, State Department, CIA. Yeah. You come in, and these people have been there. They can convince you of anything. And what it seems like, and I don't have corroborative facts to support this yet, it seems like the CIA has been part of this thing with Kellogg, and not fully reporting what's been happening, and giving President Trump an incomplete picture. So,
wow. Well,
yeah,
you had Radcliffe in that Oval Office cabinet meeting a few months ago when Trump decided to continue aid to Ukraine, and you saw like the look of relief on his face, and Hegseth was sitting there steaming. So that was kind of a tell to me, if you will. But you got Bannon out calling for Radcliffe to resign right now. So we'll see what happens. Well, I started this show by saying we're at a turning point, Pete, in Ukraine. The EU is literally, I think, at a turning point. I think the EU could collapse after this, but we can get to that. But there's also well, you sent it to me that they may be looking to have alternate plans for President Zelensky. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the wild card throughout this entire thing. The power, as you and I have been sharing throughout the show, the power in Ukraine is with the ultranationalist neo-Nazis. They're the most powerful force in the military. They're the most competent, whole unit left in the military. They have their fingers in everything in the military-industrial complex in Ukraine. They control the drones, which it controls the war. Mm-hmm. So he's a facade. Zelensky. He can only do what he wants to do on threat to his life from the ultranationalist neo-Nazis and the oligarchs who put him into power.
Yeah.
So it's a tough road to hoe. But just going back, we can't ever allow ourselves to feel sorry for him. He has been a perpetrator of the propaganda, a willing shill for these globalists and for the EU. He's the one right now, and I think that's what Putin exposed. Just back to your turning point,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't catch your part with Mearsheimer, but he's always a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
But here for the change, what was the catalyst? Well, J.D. Vance had found, I think, the first crack, and I was told that was battlefield geography. The first thing that came up was Trump did find out when he made all the comments of we can win back, or Ukraine could even win back their territory. He started getting factual information. Who knows where that came from? Could have been DOD, could have been the agency, with satellite imagery, ISR data that showed just the opposite, massive territorial gains and impending doom based on territorial positioning right now in places like Dnipropetrovsk,
Yeah.
and also down in Pokrovsk. But what changed was the trust and his relationship with Putin. When he had that conversation, Putin, we were saying Lavrov, should have done and may have done in Alaska. Putin started just telling him how it's all a farce, and that was battlefield geography. It was actual equipment losses and personnel losses. And Putin provided proof. I don't know what that was of everything he said. And he did it in a unique way that only people who are telling the truth can do. He then told President Trump how to confirm all the information himself. In other words, go to your own, special radars, which check activity coherence. There's a coherent activity radar that shows movement over time in any area you want to look on the map. And so he told him where to go to point, and apparently Trump did quickly figured out that he has not been getting the truth. And the more he checked and the more he confirmed, the more he realized Zelensky, and by proxy, all these guys we've been talking about, Kellogg's, Hodges, Petraeus, have been lying to him.
Yeah.
So, imagine the scene in the Oval Office when Zelensky and Yermak and Kellogg come walking in with their rolled up maps and put them on the coffee table. And here's Donald Trump loaded with facts that they have no answers to. And Zelensky, I was told Zelensky, the actor, was speechless. But, just take a moment and imagine how cocky they had to be with their propaganda lies to stroll into the office of any president, much less the president of the United States, and then have an actor provide an update of a grand offensive, which apparently Trump was again preloaded with facts, where he could tell him right off the bat. He did tell Zelensky, you cannot launch an offensive. You don't have the ability to launch an offensive.
Well, I also heard he said, I don't want to see your maps.
Well, he had them rolled out, and I mean, but think about that. And to me, it ties right back into what we've been talking about throughout, and that's Zelensky, his oligarchs, and unfortunately the people of Ukraine. Their story and their predicament right now, this catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't, illustrates the power of rationalized propaganda.
Yeah.
And, for the globalists, the EU, the Ukrainian politicians, the American influencers and the American left and globalists, it was a familiar formula. It starts with, getting away with one little propaganda lie. And in the beginning, it was Maidan, and then it was Nazi involvement, which they've totally erased, from any discussion in any news media anywhere around the planet. Then it was the bombing of the ethnic Russian Eastern Ukrainians. And they got away with all these propaganda lies, and they realized that the beginning of the censorship industrial complex, and they were rewarded for their lies with the spoils of war. The Ukrainian politicians, Zelensky's a billionaire, the American politicians, fame and fortune, raises, whether they were agency, State Department, and no accountability for their actions, which just encouraged them more and more to evolve the propaganda and censorship over these last 20 years. And so when we see their comments today, they're almost comical, except they're far from comical because they're so tragic. With over 1 million dead, this is a humanitarian tragedy, and these individuals, and they're using their perceived positions of authority and expertise to knowingly propagate false narratives, is a crime against humanity, and something that they need to be held accountable for. And that's why we call them out, because we're going to hold them accountable.
Well, that's well said. Of course, there hopefully accountability started in a few starts and stops, but it needs to keep going full scale. I met with Kolomoisky in Kiev just from a journalistic standpoint years ago, and I found, and he was the one funding Zelensky in the beginning, and then funding, the Azov battalion out of his own pocket or whatever he stole. But just a total mafia boss. I mean, that was my Jewish mafia boss. That was my impression. But pretty wild. I thought Mearsheimer, and you didn't hear this, but he said basically there's a lot of similarities between the end of World War II, when the German army was still pretty powerful, but they started not having enough manpower to hold certain lines, and people started breaking through the lines in certain areas, and they couldn't stop it, and that's what led to the collapse of the army and the surrender. And he said that's what's happening in Ukraine. They just don't have the people on the front line. And as you said, a light infantry war, so a squad can break through, make a bigger hole, and then more people pour through. Is that what you're hearing from your sources? Because I know you have people on the ground.
Yeah, it's been the tactic, and it's, we've had full shows on this, that the Russians, the ultimate adaptation they made was not drones. It was going to small unit, light infantry, squad, and platoon tactics, and that's what you do. You will not see a formation bigger than a couple of squads right now on this battlefield. And for Ukraine, it's a numbers thing. We've gone through those numbers. Their 2019 census said they had 7 million men from ages 21 through 60. Those numbers went down just from people fleeing the country by about 2 million. We believe they've lost 1 million men, and that's 25 to 60 because they haven't drafted below the age of 25. And then between 500,000 and 1 million deserters. And then you take the injuries, add another 1 million, and it's a numbers thing. They don't have the people. And this is a massive front line. You either have to cover it with an ISR device, or you have to have a person there, or it's open season. And the Russians have figured out that the game is constant probing. Probe everywhere, find an opening, exploit it, gain a foothold, and repeat over and over and over. And that's what they're doing. And, you know, we talk about the drones, and the drones are huge, and they still are. But it's another key differentiator between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Russians have pushed those drones down to those squad and platoon levels. So those drones have to be with the guys forward. They have to be integrated. So they, you know, a drone operator can't be some out of shape, slovenly dude. It's got to be an infantryman. Because he's got to live like an infantryman and with infantrymen to get as far forward as possible. So the Russians did that. The Ukrainians have never done that. And it's still a massive problem. Just like the entire command and control process for Ukraine, it's top down, it's disconnected hierarchies, it's VTCs, it's all the stuff that was exported that was wrong, that we did in the global war against terrorists. Ukraine's doing right now.
Well, I also noticed that President Trump essentially confirmed your reporting. He said 5,000 to 10,000 dying on the battlefield each week. I mean, that's, you know, that's in the range that you've been saying on the Ukrainian side. So at least he's starting to get some good information, it sounds like. Let's talk a minute about this general. Tell us about this guy who says he uses ChatGPT for command decisions. He's William Hank Taylor, commander of the 8th Army in South Korea. Chat and I are really close lately. I wonder if he's watching the porn that ChatGPT is putting on there now.
Yeah, and what's he?
There's a lot of memes here. Go ahead.
What's he using it for? That's...
I don't know. I gotta write something about this today. It's just unbelievable. But
yeah, I mean, well, so I would say there is very clear. I don't know anything about that guy. He's 8th Army commander, I guess. But it's a good topic for all military professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would say from this example, a general who's bragging about using AI to make decisions. So we don't know what context that's in. He's in Korea, so is he talking about garrison decisions in Yongsan around construction, or is he talking tactical and operational? And if he's talking tactical and operational, it's a prime example for all military professionals. Never do it. And the first thing you have to understand is how AI works. AI doesn't know facts. It doesn't memorize facts. It predicts language. And if the prediction sounds right to the AI, it writes it and then it defends it, even if it's fiction. And there's been some massive mess ups with the most advanced, the ChatGPT. What he's talking about was just used in a lazy lawyer used it in a federal case, and the judge discovered everything was fake. The names were made up. The case
they created false case law.
Yeah. So it's a usurping of your authority. The other thing I think people need to understand about AI, and it's very important to understand, is that it is chaos theory. And this is why AI, I don't believe will ever come out properly, will ever be an all-knowing or be on par with a human. The reason for that is chaos theory. So when a butterfly flaps its wings in Texas, it can cause a tornado in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So all that is the law of incrementalism. It's the law of compound interest. You know, a penny a day turns into $1 million in some incredibly short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So things compound. So what happens in AI, if one tiny bit of data is wrong, over time, the compound effect on that wrong data is catastrophic. And suddenly you're showing the founding fathers of America as, got Chinese, African American, all these, different female,
Yeah.
non-binary, all this stuff, because the system, it had lost its accurate integrity, its accuracy, and that happens over time. And it's just one tiny bit of inaccurate data can snowball into a massive screw up. So stay away, for life or death stuff. I would say stay away from ChatGPT and all AI for a long time. It's going to be a long time till they figure out how to get it, how to find a way to accuratize it.
Totally agree. I just wanted to throw that up there with him. Well, that's about all I had today. We have a video. Let's play this. This is another mobilization video.
Yeah.
This is how they recruit in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's incredible. So this just happened. This is 2 days ago, folks. And 2 days ago, the reason this was sent on this day is 2 days ago, Zelensky signed into law the continuation of martial law in Ukraine. He also submitted to the Rada the new bill to continue the forced conscription in Ukraine, and still no ETS, end of time in service. So guys who are serving, still there's no date where they're going to get out and be done, but forced conscription. So all this stuff is happening, and we show that because I still think it's the most powerful visual. Remember what we said, the famous litmus for all facts is, can you make sense of it with your senses?
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense to your senses? Ernst Mach, that's his famous principle. And so you have to see, hear, feel, taste, touch it to make sense of it. And you can see that every day. There's no lies involved. Those are videos taken by Ukrainian citizens. And there's 3 more of them with it. And in all of them, passerbys are fighting the conscriptors. They all jump in. So everywhere these conscriptions happen, these forced conscriptions now, people are jumping in. And in most of the cases, so 2 of those 3 other videos, they let the guy go. So the conscriptors are not fighting the civilians, the passerbys. They're just going, okay, we're done. So you're seeing this evolution of this process, but here is Ukraine in the final moments of their war. Their backs are against the river, and their people are not volunteering to serve their country. And that should be telling everyone that this whole thing is a mirage. It's a farce. It's a propaganda farce. And the ones that it matters the most that it's a farce to are the people of Ukraine. Yeah. They're the victims of this farce. And that's why people who are for the continuation of the war for political reasons are just, going against every form of human decency that there is. These people do not want to fight. And that shows you not just the problem with the people, but the problem with the message, the purpose. There's clearly no purpose, and we know that. Why is Ukraine fighting? Because you and I know how this started. We know the steps that escalated it. But those videos are, to me, the hardest empirical evidence of what a total farce this whole war is, and everything we hear about in the West, just about from mainstream media and influencers, is false.
Well, that's the most, I guess, horrendous thing to me is the dishonor of our officer class, at least a portion of them, all in on this when they know it's a farce, they know it's a lie, they know it's propaganda for some other agenda, which I don't even believe is American, but that's a whole nother situation. So anyway, I find that extremely dishonorable and not what we were supposed to be. Anyway, what else, Pete? You got anything else?
No, that's it for me, Todd.
I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, so thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Sounds good. Take care.
Well, in the case of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, these are two medications that have been FDA approved for use in humans for decades. They are very, very inexpensive. Interestingly, available over the counter in almost every other country other than the US and Canada. You can just walk into a pharmacy and buy them like we buy Tylenol in much of the world because they're that safe. And we've known for decades that ivermectin has very strong antiviral properties. It has anti-inflammatory properties, and both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are what we call zinc ionophores. They help to move zinc from the bloodstream into the cell, which is where it needs to be in order to fight off a virus. So lots of application for these, and we have every reason to believe that those drugs also will likely have some efficacy against H5N1 or a number of other respiratory viruses that we may meet down the road.
If you haven't noticed, gold has reached a new high, all-time highs actually, and keeps going up every day. Why is that? It's because precious metals are a long-time historical store of value. And if you own a portfolio and you have assets in the fiat currencies, i.e. stocks, bonds, cash, or whatever, you're vulnerable to hyperinflation, which is coming as our debt explodes another trillion every 90 days. It's really scary. So how do you protect yourself? Go to Advisor Metals. If you look on any of our cdm.press sites, about halfway down, there's an ad for Advisor Metals. Click on it, fill out the form for your contact info, and Ira Bishotsky will contact you and talk to you. It's an easy conversation. There's no sales pitch. He's completely verified by us. He has a regulatory background we've checked into. We've checked with his bankers. We've checked with his IRA custodians for metals, and we can highly recommend Advisor Metals and IRA. So go to Advisor Metals. If you call them directly, tell them we sent you at CDM, and he'll definitely take care of you. But protect your portfolio because you really need to. It's coming. Thank you. Welcome back to the SCIF. So cdmmetals.com, you can get in touch with Advisor Metals. Just fill out the form and they will contact you. And again, he's a patriot. We've checked all his references. We can highly recommend, and we've had fantastic feedback from our viewers who use him as a precious metals provider. So please, if you have assets that you need to protect in your 401k or whatever, give Advisor Metals a call. Either fill out the form or call them directly, and just make sure you tell them we sent you. Thank you. And Christmas is coming. Middle East is about to blow again, paying the price, the untold story of the Iranian resistance. You can find this anywhere books are sold, and understand the Iranian situation much better and how it can be taken down from the inside and not via a war with our troops. And also, please support MyPillow.com for Christmas gifts. Go there before you go to the big box retailer. See if Mike can provide it. MyPillow.com. Use promo code CDM for the best discounts. And also, if you have a financial issue, divorce, sale of a business, death in the family, whatever, and you need financial advice, our resident financial advisor is David Cross. So please check him out. US-am.com, usassetmanagement.com. David Cross. Wonderful experience and feedback from people who've worked with him as well. That's all we got today. We had another guest, but that dropped out. We'll be back tomorrow with a great show. Who do we have tomorrow? We have Yifa Segal, direct from Tel Aviv. That should be interesting, and other guests. So stay with us tomorrow, Monday through Friday, 10 to noon Eastern on the SCIF. And we'll have the Georgia show tomorrow evening at 7. Talk to you later. Take care.